Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Craft Cannabis TV. I'm really excited about today's interview. I'd like to welcome Kelly McQue. Did I get that right?
Yes,
Yes, I
Kelly
did.
McQue.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I know what it is, and I just thought I might get it wrong. But anyway, welcome, Kelly. It's a real privilege and an honor to have you on Craft Cannabis TV. I'm excited to explore your journey. You are the author of this fine book called At Home with Cannabis, How to Make and Use Cannabis Products Safely and Effectively at Home, which we're definitely going to get into. But before we start, maybe you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Thank you very much for having me with you today and giving me a chance to talk a little bit more about my book and about cannabis and how it's helped me. So just to introduce myself very briefly, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, and in 2012 I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I decided not to go the conventional route and do the chemo, surgery and radiation, and instead I decided to go the natural route and came across cannabis and then made my own cannabis oil, which I then used to completely heal myself. And I've just been very involved in the cannabis community and trying to spread awareness to people to try and share the same results that I had in my life. I really would like to be able to share that with other people, which is why I then wrote the book. So the book is really just to help provide people with the basic information that they need if they're embarking on a healing journey using cannabis.
Knowing your story that you effectively self-healed yourself from cannabis was already mind-blowing in itself. Even though I've heard of people internationally doing the same thing, I'd never actually met someone that had done that. And reading your book was a mind-altering experience. It's beautifully written. I had two feelings in the book. I was emotionally moved by the story, and then I was angered by the fact that cannabis is still not 100% legal, you know.
Exactly.
And we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things you talk about in your book is, and was the reason that you decided to go the natural route, because that's a very brave decision. And that came from, you know, watching your grandfather pass away from cancer, but from the negative impact chemo had on him and how it destroyed his body. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how that was the trigger that made you make this decision to go natural.
My grandfather, when he was diagnosed, he was eventually diagnosed with colon cancer. He was in his 70s, but he was still extremely healthy. He was active. He was walking up a mountain every day. Mentally, he was all there. And when he first started going in for treatments because the doctor said that there was something wrong, it really marked like a transition in our lives where we saw this man that had always been so sort of athletic and capable. And we watched, you know, with the surgeries, with the chemo, just how much it weakened him and took away his independence. And so it was heartbreaking for us to watch this going on. And he really tried everything and did everything that the doctors recommended and suggested. And eventually he was then put onto morphine to help him with the pain. And then, of course, that was just horrifying because then we kind of lost him. And so by the time he actually passed away, it was a very heartbreaking, the whole journey had been a very heartbreaking, hurtful experience. So when I got the same diagnosis that I also had cancer, it really was a big part of my decision making, because I was perhaps even more afraid of going the conventional route because of what I had seen happening to my grandfather. And also, I do feel that the way we approach healing with doctors, especially with cancer, is actually to give our power away. We put all the responsibility into the hands of these doctors. We just have to do what we're told and hope for the best. And so I just felt that
with everything to a degree, all of our health, you know. Well,
absolutely.
It's you know, at the end of the day, it's not the government's job to look after our health. It's not the pharmaceutical or the medical professionals' job to look after our health.
No.
It's our own job, and as human beings, we haven't been taught to empower ourselves around our own physical well-being and mental well-being, you know?
Well, that's exactly it. We haven't been taught to empower ourselves, and we're certainly not encouraged to. Yeah, not everybody was supportive of the route that I took either.
Let's unpack that, actually. So you decided you were going to go this route. I believe your husband was very, very supportive, which is amazing. Yeah. But you had different reactions from different people that you knew. Maybe we can unpack that a bit.
I was very careful about who I actually spoke to with regards to what I was doing. And in fact, I decided not even to tell a lot of people that I had been given the cancer diagnosis. So for me, I got the diagnosis. I decided I wasn't going to go the conventional route. I wasn't completely certain where I was going to go. And so I kind of kept that to myself. It was really just about focusing down and getting through this in the best way that I could. But afterwards, when I spoke to people, you know, telling them my story in hindsight, I got quite a lot of different input from people. But I have to admit, most people were very supportive. They were surprised, but they were happy for me. They wanted me to be well and they wanted me to be healed. And so they were very supportive and very curious. There's been a huge shift. I mean, people really are just very open. They're very accepting of the fact that cannabis does have these healing qualities. They just want to know more now about how they can actually use it to benefit themselves.
I mean, to make that decision, you know, it takes incredible mental reserve and resilience, you know, and, you know, you must have had moments where you've gone, am I mad, you know, or am I enlightened? And there must have been this constant battle between the traditional ways of dealing with things and like, what if I'm making a mistake and what if this doesn't work? There must have been a lot of fear. Tell us about some of the emotions you went through and how you dealt with those, how you navigated those.
For anybody who suffers with depression, they know that that's one of the main obstacles in your life. Is depression comes with a lot of self-doubt. So I was already in that state. I had chronic depression, and then after my daughter was born, that intensified to the point where I couldn't work. I could barely leave the house. I wasn't eating well. I was really only managing to function on the most basic things I was able to do. I didn't really know what the best way forward was, whether to go, you know, whether to trust the doctors or whether to push forward on my own. For me, what it was there was two things. Number one was I'm a great believer in the power of our minds and our intention, and that if we put our minds to something sincerely and focused, we can achieve that result. So in a way, I felt like this was now my opportunity to prove it to myself, to walk the talk, really. It was just about finding the right treatment, which ended up being cannabis oil. And although I was taking the cannabis oil for the cancer, it did have that wonderful effect after about 4 weeks where I started to suddenly just feel, it's very difficult to put it into words, but just I felt better. I felt more excited about my future, about possible outcomes. And the longer I took the cannabis, the stronger I actually became emotionally and mentally. And because of that, I think whenever that self-doubt crept in, there was another voice that would come through and it would always say to me, there's no way you're still dying if you're feeling this good. And I just kept telling myself that and reminding myself that. But of course, I did have scans scheduled, you know, as I went along to monitor my progress. I wasn't just waiting on, hoping for the best. Yeah. I wanted to know that it was actually working. It helped me to find focus in a way that I had never really been able to do before. The depression lifted within about a month of being on the oil, and it got better and better and better the longer I took it. And with that, my mental ability actually started improving. So I'm sure you know depression damages your brain. Yeah. So there's certain things that I still find quite difficult. My organizational skills can be a little bit dicey. And what's been fascinating is actually watching myself improve. The longer I've been taking the cannabis, watching those skills return slowly but surely, to the point where I really do feel that I'm now healthier than I was 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah, I found that fascinating in the book, you know, which obviously the focus is largely around the cancer. And then all of a sudden, you know, you talk about how it was almost like a residual effect that the depression just started to lift. And I'm like, wow, I'm reading how this happened and how how amazing that must have felt, and how as the mind strengthened, the body strengthened. And I guess, you spoke earlier about how our minds are so powerful, and that, I'm sure, was a factor in healing the cancer as well, because it's not just about hitting it physically. It is in the mind, and the mind is a very powerful thing. We still don't understand truly how it works.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a bit about how you discovered how to make your own oil, because it can be a little bit scary, even if you're talking about CBD, which is unregulated. If you're taking stuff like that for health and wellness, you need to know that there's consistency, that it is tested, there are no heavy metals and pesticides, etc., etc. But you decided to make it yourself, and just tell us about that process. Like, how did you decided to make your own medicine? What were the things that went through your mind? Again, did you have that, thing on your shoulder, you're going like, are you crazy? Or was it quite sort of a natural process?
It's funny, when something resonates, it generally just flows. And I definitely felt that way with the cannabis. And I really was very keen to try this, having smoked cannabis at university and everything. I knew it. And I've always been more inclined to the more natural ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So that was my only option, was to make it myself. And as you say, and this is really something I really try to get across to people, it's very simple. It's very simple to make this. You don't have to be an expert to make good oil. You've got to have some common sense. If you're making the concentrated oil, obviously you're using a solvent, your alcohol. You're wanting to extract you want to burn off as much of that as possible, and you really don't want to leave any toxins in the oil.
Yeah, and I think getting the main ingredients is one of the challenges, because ultimately, what the product you put in is the product you get out. And I want to talk a little bit about dosing. I'm very passionate about this whole dosing conversation, because I really believe in edibles. From a recreational, I believe even if you're taking edibles recreationally, I believe it's medicinal anyway, because it helps with relaxation, it shifts your perspective, Exactly. It can help on so many levels. And I love the story about how you licked the spoon when you were making the oil for the first time, and obviously it was highly concentrated, so you woke up stoned the next morning, and I've experienced that myself. And unfortunately, a lot of people have had bad experience with edibles because of dosing. Maybe you could just give us some insight from your experience on dosing, because that's a question we have constantly.
Yeah.
What are some of the dosing protocols from your experience, and where are the parameters that you could really talk about,
So I agree with you with the dosing. It's super important. And getting it right is important, and being sort of sensible and responsible with your dosage. For me, it's so important that people get it right, because we don't want to scare people off. We don't want to frighten them away from something that is so amazing. So my mantra always to people is start small. Start small. You yourself do not know what your personal tolerance is until you actually take the cannabis. So I always recommend to people to start with, if you're using the concentrated FICO oil, to always start with a match head. I describe it as literally a little prick like that, match head. And you have to take that match head for 2 nights, not 1 night and then increase. And the reason being is, quite often people who haven't used cannabis for a long time, their receptors are dormant. And so the first time they use cannabis, they don't really feel anything. And then what happens is the next night they double their dose, thinking they didn't take enough. Yeah. And then they have a freaky moment. Yeah. So always to people, my advice is you only increase on the 3rd night. So 2 nights you're going to do your little match head and just feel and see how your body responds to that and how you feel with that. The whole thing about cannabis is it's helping you to learn about yourself, to learn and become more aware of your own body and how it responds. And that's how you will heal yourself. And so when you take the cannabis, you've got to watch yourself and learn how it affects you.
And document it, write it down.
Yes. Oh yeah, look, I mean, if you're good at that sort of thing, I'm not. So.
Well, at least mentally documented,
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Make a note, but increasing it slowly is really the step, and watching how it affects you. But something I've noticed is that not all of us need the same amount. Our tolerance also seems to play on that too.
It's the titration method, effectively. But what would you advise? And I appreciate that giving advice, is not it's not set in stone. So people need to take the advice and figure it out for themselves to a degree. I mean, the advantage of cannabis is obviously that you cannot die from cannabis. But I think that what's super important is that there are some kind of benchmarks to start with. So I interviewed a doctor who sits on our board on the academy a few weeks ago, and he said, if you want anything sort of impact from CBD, his recommendation, he runs a pain clinic, and he's a cannabis doctor and expert. He says,
Wow.
you need 70 milligrams a day of CBD really to have an impact. That was his advice. What is do you have a starting point and a range you can, and again, this is just for the people watching this video, this is purely guidance, but we've got to the guidance helps us create those parameters to work within,
I'm not really, when it comes to the 70 milligrams of this and that, I'm not really too au fait when it comes to that. For me, it's more a case of what do I feel is going to be more effective for your situation. So when it comes to pain, I'm a big believer in THC helping for pain. So it would be more of a case of what would I recommend for you? So would I recommend a high THC or a high CBD? And then within that, which strain specifically do I think would help you, or, that sort of thing. Working with people, I've just seen people, they vary so much. Everyone is different. So for that specific reason, I don't recommend set amounts. I recommend playing with it, but where I do recommend is whether or not I think you need a higher THC or a higher CBD. When it comes to pain, I know CBD is great for inflammation and all of that, but when it comes to real pain, for me, THC is the only thing that's actually going to help someone.
Yeah, no, fair enough. It is, and this is the complication with cannabis, because it is psychoactive and it's not a one size fits all. This is why it's so slow to really to move into the mainstream market, So I understand that, as frustrating as it can be. I want to know what the medical industry, from your perspective, think of you, and do they dislike you? Are they afraid of you? The medical industry is very much about precision and results and testing, and I mean that's what the industry was built on. And,
it's all about,
for reasons, but I understand. But what's the feedback and energy that you get from the medical industry, from doctors, etc.?
So I get two types of main feedback from the doctors. You get your doctors who are genuinely wanting to help people, and they have heard the stories about cannabis and they have seen their own clients improve, and they have looked into it more and they are learning more about cannabis, which I really appreciate. And it's very dangerous for doctors because they can lose their license doing anything with something that's not acceptable like cannabis. But what I most often encounter is the other kind of doctor. And that doctor is not terribly happy with me, and we can't blame them. And it's because most of the people that I'm helping who go on cannabis, within the first month, they come off of the sleeping pills they were buying from their doctor, and then they come off the blood pressure pills that they were buying from their doctor. So I see that, unfortunately, as much as I would like to work with doctors, I see that, unfortunately, the cannabis actually takes away from their livelihood because it reduces how much pharmaceutical that their clients are actually dependent on. And when it comes to someone who's using cannabis who wants to work with their doctor, I really do recommend sourcing a doctor that is open-minded, not just going with just any old guy.
Well, there's, it's just so steeped in negative mystery and political discourse for the last 100 odd years that it's quite difficult to break those barriers. And there are a lot of very good people working in the medical industry, and I think it's important to contextualize that it's not all bad. Just quickly back to your book. There's some great illustrations in there, recipes. You probably can't see it. There's some recipes at the back, how to make your own oils. It really is an amazing book for anybody who has an interest in cannabis. What advice would you give to somebody who has heard about cannabis, and apart from reading a book, which I would definitely advise them to do, what advice would you give to somebody as a jump off point?
Start now.
Yeah, fair enough.
Don't hesitate.
Just do it.
I really feel that it empowers you so much more than being reliant on somebody else. So my advice is to people is, as much as you can, either try grow it, or if you're not comfortable growing it yet or whatever, make your own. Don't be afraid to actually, what you are making in your kitchen is no different than what someone is making at a lab, except that you know exactly what's going in there. And definitely always start small. Please, with your doses, always start small. Smaller is better, and work your way up as and when you feel you can. And stick to it. That's the other thing, is a lot of people think that cannabis is a quick fix. It's not. It's a natural herbal substance. You've got to take it consistently. I take mine every evening before I go to bed, every evening. One of the things that is not mentioned about cannabis, I don't think a lot of people understand it, is how much it actually is able to empower you through helping you to feel stronger. It really is sort of the catalyst for people to empower themselves to improve their lives. And I'm not just talking about health. I'm talking about in general, your outlook, your well-being, your perspective of the world. Cannabis really does help to improve you, brings your mind to the table. And for me personally, I really do feel that it's enhanced me a great deal using the cannabis.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's also important to just recognize is that it's not a silver bullet. It's not for everybody, and it's not going to fix all your issues. It's a combination. If you use cannabis with exercise, with yoga, and you bring it into eating correctly, it's that balance. And it can be a real shift and a real key opener to a different way of thinking. So I think that's why it's super important. And I really would encourage everybody to try it.
And when you put something like cannabis into the mix, and it's suddenly out of the blue, you just feel, I feel good. I feel normal. I feel like I can. That is what I feel is the most powerful healing aspect of cannabis, is that it actually makes you feel like you can do this.
Yeah, I agree. And in the challenging times we're in, even pre-COVID, the world is a tough place to live in, and there's a lot of inequality and a lot of suffering. And I believe cannabis can really, be part of healing the world and making it a better place. Kelly, thank you so much for your time. I'm really moved by your story. What we didn't touch on is that you're also helping a lot of people, and some of those stories are in the book. So it's not that you cured yourself of cancer and that you're alone. You have other case studies. It's real, you hear about it all the time, but to read the real case studies in your book was incredibly inspiring for me. And, the journey that you've been on, and the fact that you're sharing that journey and giving back and helping other people, I think is beautiful and powerful. So thank you so much. And if you haven't got a copy of this book, I'm going to give it a shameless plug. Please go out and get it. It's a great book.
Thank you, Trenton.
It really is. It's a nice, easy read. It's not too bogged down in heavy medical sort of jargon. So it's a really good entry point to give you some experience or some knowledge in that space. Thanks for joining us on Craft Cannabis TV. You can check out Kelly's details over here somewhere. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more cannabis education and moving the African cannabis industry forward. Subscribe and follow us now.